You're a highly skilled healthcare professional. You make life-saving decisions. You explain complex diagnoses. You handle immense pressure every single day. And yet, you could be held back by an English test. It's incredibly frustrating, right? So why does this keep happening? And, more importantly, how do we fix it? Let's dive in. For so many of you, there's this massive disconnect. You look at your clinical skills and you know you're great at your job. You pass real-world tests every day with patients. But then you get your OET score back and it just doesn't add up. It doesn't reflect your reality. This is the number, 350. It's the magic number, right? It's the score you need, that key that unlocks that dream job you've worked so incredibly hard for. That's the goal. And then there's this number, 340. It is the source of so much frustration. You are right there. You're so close. But that tiny 10-point gap feels like a massive canyon. If that feels a little too familiar, then this is for you. We're going to break down exactly how to bridge that gap. So here's the game plan. We'll start with the key changes to the OET in 2026. Then we'll uncover the logic traps waiting for you in Part C, and we'll finish up with some killer strategies to nail your writing and speaking sections. All right, so let's talk about what's new. First, you now get an overall score. I want you to think of this like a performance dashboard. It's not just 4 separate scores anymore. It really helps you see where your strengths are and where your bleeding points. Second, the speaking test is on a new dedicated platform. And a quick word of warning here. I saw a candidate literally freeze for 20 seconds because they couldn't figure out where to click. That's a tech issue, not an English issue. And third, hey, you get your results faster, which is always good news for deadlines. But here is the big one, and it is crucial, especially for anyone aiming for the US. You now have to get all your required scores in one single test. One sitting. This raises the stakes a lot. There's no more, it's okay, I'll just retake my writing test next month. Nope. It all has to come together on game day. Now, let's get to the real heart of the issue for so many people. Why do incredibly fluent, brilliant English speakers get stuck on Part C? This is probably the #1 reason people land on 340 instead of 350, and the reason is probably not what you think it is. So here's the secret. OET Part C isn't really a language test. It is a logic test disguised as a language test. It's not checking if you know the vocabulary, it's checking if you can follow the author's reasoning. If you're only studying more English words, you're honestly fighting the wrong battle. Just look at this slide. It's a perfect example of the trap. The wrong answer, the distractor, might say a treatment is effective in all patients. Seems plausible, right? But then you look at the actual text, and the author uses careful words like appears and some. That one word completely changes the meaning. The difference between an absolute and a possibility is everything on this test. And here's another classic trap they love to set. You'll see a medical term in an answer that you know really well, like hypertension management, and your brain just latches on because it's familiar territory. But that's the distractor. You have to train yourself to ask, what is the author's actual opinion here? What are they arguing? Don't let yourself get sidetracked by familiar words. You know, this whole idea of focusing only on what's truly important, it carries straight over into the writing section. The biggest mistake people make here isn't about hidden logic. It's about including way too much information. We call this case note dumping. Just imagine you're writing a referral to an orthopedist for a patient with a fractured arm. Do they really truly need to know about that patient's childhood asthma? Or their diet? Absolutely not. All that extra, irrelevant information just makes it harder for them to find the important clinical details. So, how do you decide what to keep and what to cut? It's easy. Use this simple question as a filter for every single piece of information you're thinking of including. Does this help the next clinician treat this patient safely and effectively? If the answer is no, it does not belong in your letter. It is that simple. And here's a super practical, quick check for you. If you look down and see that your letter is creeping up towards 300 words, it is almost guaranteed you've included too much detail. In the OET, being clear and concise will always be a long, overly detailed letter. Less is more. Okay, now let's talk about a part of the writing test that catches almost everyone off guard, that 5-minute reading time at the beginning. What you do, and maybe more importantly, what you don't do in these 5 minutes can absolutely make or break your writing score. The rule is absolute. You cannot write a single thing. Not a note, not a word, not even a tiny underline. I have seen candidates get disqualified for instinctually picking up their pen just to follow along with the text. So please, put the pen down. So what are you supposed to be doing? You're performing a mental edit. Use this time to read the task and figure out who your audience is. Scan the notes to find the main clinical issue. And start filtering, just like we talked about. Okay, acute fracture? Don't need childhood history. Oh, discharge planning? Yes, I absolutely need those social details. You're pre-editing the entire letter in your head so that when the writing time actually begins, you're not thinking, you're just executing.
All right, let's wrap this up with this speaking test. The goal here is not to sound like you've memorized a medical textbook. The goal is to sound like a real clinician having a natural, normal conversation with a patient. And this slide illustrates the difference perfectly. So many candidates use these overly formal, kind of robotic phrases like the one on the left. It just sounds unnatural. Instead, just be human. Simple, empathetic language like, I can see why that's worrying, is so much more effective, and it will actually score you higher.
You also need to show that you can guide the conversation. We call this signposting. You start with a broad, open question. Then you narrow it down with more specific ones. And you always tell the patient where you're going next. This structure shows the examiner you are in control of the consultation, and that is a key clinical skill they're looking for.
So as we have seen through all of this, getting past that 340 barrier, it's really not about cramming more vocabulary or studying English for more hours. It's about studying smarter. It's about understanding the traps, thinking clearly when you're under pressure, and applying the right strategy to the right part of the test.
Because ultimately, the one thing I really want you to take away from all this is that the difference between a 340 and a 350 is almost never about how good your English is. It's all about your approach. If you change your approach, I promise you, you will change your score.